Hello, everybody. You are listening to the Earful Tower podcast, and I'm very, very proud to say that this bonus episode, is brought to you by the very kind and generous Patreon supporters, the people who pay a monthly pledge to support this show in return for loads of bonus content. And there is some bonus that comes with this episode I'll talk about in a second. But first, the episode. David Downie. Now, he's written a book called Paris, Paris. I've talked about it on the show before. It's currently the book club book for you guys who like reading and are in the Facebook group where we dissect a book about Paris or France every month. The story, if you haven't listened to recent episodes, the story goes that I met David's wife, Alison, a couple of times around Paris, and eventually I said, look, I really want to interview and meet your husband. And she said, here's his phone number, give him a call. I called him up and he said, yes, I'm very busy. I'm leaving town in a couple of days. We can meet tomorrow in the shadow of the fig tree in the park just off Rue de Rosiers. And when he said that, you'll hear it in the episode, but I felt like James Bond or some kind of spy or something, and I loved it. So I did. I went and met him under the shade of the fig tree in the park that has a part of the Philippe Auguste wall. So you regular listeners know that I'm already salivating at this opportunity. We sat down, had a really great chat, and you're about to hear it. So before we get into it, though, a little bit of sort of information here. The book is called Paris, Paris, Journey into the City of Light. We've been reading it as a big group in the book club, which is currently just on Facebook, but you can find it by looking on my Facebook page, scrolling down. There's a thing that says book club. Join it, see what people are saying about the book. Personally, I love it. I've really been enjoying it. I love the way it's written. And, well, you'll hear, I'm going to talk about it a bit with David here. The other thing, if you're a Patreon supporter, what does that mean? It means you pay a monthly pledge, you become a member, you get bonus stuff. One of these bonus things, and I can tell you exactly what this is because it's already done, is with some of the episodes like this one, there's a beautiful PDF guide to the episode. And this one is 10 pages long. It's got pictures of everything that David and I mentioned. It's even got a map. There's a part somewhere towards the end, he talks about a perfect walk in Paris and how to do it along the river. That's there mapped out. There's quotes from David, there's addresses, there's clickable things. These things take a long time to put together, so I'm putting it for Patreon supporters only. So why not press pause, become a member, go and get that, download it, and use it as a reading guide to go with this episode. But that's enough from me. Hang around at the end. I'll read a little bit of Gmail from you listeners. But here comes David Downie from the park of Rue de Rosiers on the Eiffel Tower. Let's do it. David Downie, how are you?
I'm great, and I just want to point out that there is a tomato plant growing over there among the weeds.
How did you notice that?
Because I love plants, and I love tomatoes. If you rub the leaves, the scent is just amazing.
Right.
So I'm constantly looking at plants, and even though I've written most of my books about Paris or Rome, my last novel is called The Gardener of Eden, and there is even though it has nothing to do with gardening, there is a gardening theme to it because I'm a kind of a crazy gardener.
Right, and even the fact that we're meeting here under a fig tree is right on the. I thought when you said it, it felt like we were in a spy encounter or something like that.
Well, I was very gratified that you knew immediately where I was talking about, and. Speaking of fig trees, I'm sure you know, because you seem to know an awful lot of things, that the fig tree was brought to Paris by the ancient Romans.
Well, firstly, I'll correct you. I don't know much. And secondly, I definitely didn't know that. And that's kind of cool.
Well, you knew enough to seek me out, and so that's kind of cool, too. The ancient Romans were obsessed with force-feeding various poor little beasts that they then devoured. They loved that.
Right.
And mostly waterfowl, but also pigs. And so they used figs to do that.
Right. Interesting.
And so they brought the fig tree up to Paris. Well, as you've noticed, they never really ripen here. But the Romans, the weather was different back then, too. They had ways of getting them to ripen. And in any case, it's just one of those funny details. I always loved this particular fig tree because it's so wonky and spread out all over and growing practically right out of the 12th century wall.
Right. Oh, and that's something we should talk about straight away. But first, Do you think this might be the only fig tree, at least in central Paris?
Oh no, I could take you on a whole walking tour of fig trees in Paris. The most famous ones are down on the Rue du Figuier, which means fig tree
Whereabouts
road.
is that?
It's down by the Hôtel de Sens near the Seine,
Ah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
near the beginning
Yes.
of the wall of Philip Augustus.
Yeah.
That road was named for a famous fig tree that was there. They know it was there from the 1200s onwards.
Right.
It could have been there before that. It was probably one of the old trees brought up during the Roman Empire. And there are lots of great stories associated with that particular spot
Right.
that saw two famous murders.
Is this something we should get into, these two famous murders?
Oh, God, that's history. It's ancient history, too. I mean, it's really old.
We've got a lot. There's a lot that we need to talk about,
Yeah,
especially your
right.
book. But all roads usually lead to Rome. I feel like all the roads are leading to the Philip Augustus Wall. Are you also fascinated with this?
Yeah, I think fascination is a nice way to put it. For a long time, I was obsessed with it, in part because where I live with my wife, the wall is probably, I don't know, 100 yards, less than 100 yards, meters, whatever, away. I live in the Marais,
Right.
and in a very old building that has even older cellars, and I became fascinated with the wall probably, over 30 years ago. I've been here 33 years, and I discovered that this wall still existed by talking to various people and reading books. And then probably 32 years ago, I went into the fire station in the Rue de Sévigné.
Right.
Have you ever been in there?
Well, I went there once for the Bal de Pompiers, the
Right,
fireman's
right,
ball,
right.
and then when I was once tracing the wall, I tried to get them to let me in, and they said they wouldn't let me.
30 years ago, they were a little less strict, or maybe it was because my wife was with me, and she was very attractive.
Right.
So they let us go down into the control room that's inside the tower,
Right.
under street level. And then I started tracing it, and I discovered that the wall is, I'm not sure what percentage of it is there, but more than you would think, and more than anyone will tell you, because it was integrated into the walls of big buildings that were
Yeah.
built afterwards.
Sure.
And the whole street pattern of central Paris depends in large part on the wall and where it went, and the roads that were just inside and just outside it.
Right.
And the gates through it,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
And you can still see portions of a few of those, as you know.
Especially down by the basketball court,
Yes.
which is that's how my fascination started. Was I played basketball there.
Oh, okay.
And then
Rue Charlemagne.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I used to shoot hoops, and just everyone was sitting against that wall. And one day, I don't know, I think I looked it up on the internet,
Yeah.
and that started an obsession
Well, there you go.
as well.
Right. So, yeah, there are lots of wonderful things associated with that wall right near where you played basketball. You probably know this, but Molière, the playwright, had one of his famous theaters in a disused handball court, a jeu de paume,
Right.
that was built onto the wall.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was knocked down, a couple of 100 years ago. Unfortunately, for some reason, the authorities decided to knock down the little fortress that was on the edge of the Seine where the wall came
Right.
down.
Yeah, yeah.
And you know that there was a big chain that was hooked up to that fortress and
And that was to
crossed
stop
the river.
boats from. That was essentially a fence for the boats, right?
Yeah, it was like a submarine net before
a net.
submarines.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I became fascinated with it. Then one day, I remember a long time ago, I went into a parking lot in the Latin Quarter, and I was standing there, and I looked over, and I saw this massive wall, and I went over and then looked down, and you can see way down to the bottom of the wall. And, of course, no one... At that time, there were none of these historic paddles around town,
Sure.
and nobody knew what this was. And I asked the attendant and everything, and everybody just said, "Oh yeah, that's just some big old wall." And I said, "Don't you think that's a tower over there that you can see?" And so forth. And
Wow.
they take it for granted.
But I think still, even today, that is very much taken for granted, that wall. This park that we're in, there's a tower
Yeah,
20 meters behind you, right there, behind the fig tree.
right.
And I would wager 99% of the people walking in here have no idea what that sort of signifies or what it is.
Absolutely. They don't know. For one thing, that tower was transformed in the Renaissance into a chapel, and it was painted. And they've found traces of the frescoes. They're pretty much worn off now. But it goes along with the story of the Rue des Rosiers, which you know, that in the 1500s, under Francis I, he loved roses, and he wanted a place to plant his rose garden, so they planted the roses up against the old wall, and the road outside it became known as the Rue des Rosiers, and it kept its name, the Rosebush Road.
Yeah, how interesting.
Yeah, so of course the roses are gone, but the wall remains.
You know what I'd love to, something I've been meaning to do is when I explored the right bank wall, is I tried to trace it. I walked up, wall walk.
Right.
I want to do the same on the left bank. You've probably already done it, but if you want to join me, you could be my guest of honor.
Well, we could do that at some point. That'd be great. Yeah.
This is one thing I've to your book. The sort of key reason that I got in touch with you is I've been reading. You know already, I'm a big fan of your work. I think I told your wife when I met her in the Red Wheelbarrow bookshop. It's like you've got, everyone's dealt the same sort of vocab. Imagine you got a Scrabble bag of letters.
Right.
I'm amazed with what you can do with that bag of words.
Yeah.
It's really enjoyable to read. So thank you for putting that out to the world.
Thank you. Well, thank you. I'm flattered.
But tell me, it's very well researched, obviously. Do you remember all this stuff, or is it sort of you?
Ooh, I'll tell you something. Years and years and years ago, before you were born, I don't want to sound like an old you-know-what, but I worked briefly for the United States State Department as an interpreter guide. And what I learned is that if you did not instantaneously forget what you were interpreting, you would go mad, literally.
Right.
And so I have this ability to learn things, and they come into my head, and I let go of them.
Yeah. Okay.
So do I remember everything in the book? In a way, probably the way you would have to recover a hard disk on a computer or something. But man, I can't recite things from those chapters. Also, bear in mind that I took over 10 years to write that book because before the internet and digital technology, I worked for dozens of newspapers and magazines. I counted over 50 of them in my career.
Wow.
As a print journalist and author. And so I wrote almost all those chapters for newspapers, magazines, newsletters, and then I wrote them with the book in mind. Yeah. But I got assignments so that I could earn some money doing it.
Yeah.
And then I repurposed them and edited them and put them together in this collection. So some of the stories in there at this point are about 20 years old.
Well, so I worked as a journalist a lot as well, and I got the sense sometimes, like the peniche, the boats, the houseboats.
Yeah.
When I was reading that, I was like, that feels like the kind of thing that is heavily researched with, like for a long form article or something like that.
Oh, absolutely. That was a big story for BBC World.
Right.
And then I sold it to somebody else. I don't remember. I was syndicated once upon a time.
Right.
I'm a nobody now, but anyway.
That's not true.
Well, anyway, it took me a very long time to research and write those stories. I was very passionate about them. A number of them I researched and wrote at the same time that I was working on my second published novel, which is a crime novel called Paris, City of Night. And so some of those stories from that period reflect the issues, the things that I was dealing with in that novel. And, I put my heart and soul and loins into this book, and it's still my most popular book. It's the best-selling book I've ever written, except maybe one other that did well, Paris to the Pyrenees. I'm still getting royalty checks for it, and I'm about to bring out a sequel
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, not about. It's going to take me a couple of years,
Right.
but I'm finally coming around to doing it. One of my editors at a big publisher in the States wants me to do that, and I've been writing novels of late, and so this is going to be a return to nonfiction.
Exciting. So tell me what, can you give me any kind of glimpse into the chapters we're looking at for that? Anything I can look forward to?
Well, there are 33 chapters in this book, in Paris, Paris. I think there are 33. There were in the first volume. This is the second volume of it, or edition, and I think maybe there are 30 in that one. I can't remember. So if you can think of another 30 quintessential views of Paris,
Right.
then you will have my 30 chapters
Right. Okay.
that are coming up.
Right.
But if you look at Paris, Paris, there are a whole bunch of really important people who are not in it simply because I ran out of time and pages. So in the new book, I'm going to do, for example, a whole chapter on Victor Hugo, and a whole chapter on Georges Sand and Chopin and their love affair, and a whole chapter on Alexandre Dumas and so forth. And then there will be more phenomena, things about Paris, including my current pet peeve. You probably won't want to talk to me anymore about, but I'm of the generation where I think people need to walk and use public transportation in a city, and these little scooters everywhere.
Yeah. You mean the electric, the trottinettes?
The trottinette.
Yeah, right.
They drive me up the wall.
Yeah.
I trip over them. I don't see well, and they're always in the way.
They're always badly parked.
Yeah, and just the lack of civility of most of the people who ride them. They run into you. They push you off the sidewalk. They shouldn't be riding on the sidewalk.
Well, it's illegal now.
I know, but they still do it all the time.
I saw one the other day. There were 3 people on it.
Yeah.
So,
oh, sure.
you know what I saw the other day in the Place de Vosges? There was someone had parked. You saw it?
Yeah. Look at
It was
my
you that did
Facebook
it.
page.
You should look at my Instagram page.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I got lots of whatchamacallits, likes and all that.
Right. Is that where you're most active, on Facebook?
Yes,
Yeah.
I've got about 4,000 friends.
Right.
Although, what that really means, I don't know. I was told to join Facebook by one of my publishers 10 years ago exactly. And I've actually met a lot of really nice, interesting people through Facebook.
Yeah.
So I don't want to knock it, although I'm also terrified by it.
Yeah.
Because I think it's way too powerful.
Yeah.
I think it needs to be resized, and I don't know what. But again, I've got very bad vision, so I try not to look at the screen much.
Sure.
But Facebook, I put stuff on Facebook, and then it goes automatically on Twitter.
Right.
Because I loathe Twitter, but I use it. Ever since Donald Trump started tweeting, just the name Twitter makes me sick.
Yeah.
So
Let's bring it back to Paris for a second. But firstly, when you said you thought I wouldn't want to talk to you, I agree with you on the electric scooters. They drive me crazy as well. But sometimes people say you remind me of myself when I was younger. You remind me of myself when I'm older.
Well, I hope not, for your sake.
Why is that?
Well, I'm falling apart at the joints, but anyway, I've got brown eyes and you have blue eyes, and you're about a foot taller. So
what about to the subject of Paris? Kind of an easy / difficult question. What do you like about this city?
Oof. Oh well, lots of things. It's a big city, but it's not too big if you're in the center. I mean, obviously it sprawls all over the place, but compared to something like London or New York or Shanghai or Mexico City or something like that, it's tiny by those standards. I walk constantly. I'm a walkaholic, and I can walk across Paris still, from one side of the periphery to the other in about an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes, depends which way I go and how active I'm feeling. So you can still command it, you can walk it, you can understand it, in a really physical way through your feet and your eyes. Another thing I still like about French society in general, and Paris in particular, is that you can be someone like me who in America would be considered one step up from a bum, a hobo, because I don't earn much. But I've published 15 books, and I've done umpteen articles, and I've been on the radio and TV 1,000 times and everything. But and in France, you're respected for that, and you're respected for your achievements and for the fact that you are intelligent and educated and you know something about history and you speak languages. In America, by and large, with the exception of places like New York, San Francisco, Chicago, and Santa Fe, but I think in most of America, people still want to know how much you earn, what kind of car you drive, that kind of thing, which I find very depressing. I left America during the reign of Ronald Reagan because I simply couldn't stomach the notion that we would have the religious right in control. And I was so happy to get to a place where, I lived in a maid's room in the beginning. But no one cared. I met all kinds of people. I was invited to dinner parties. I got to know all these foreign correspondents and authors and painters and great photographers and everything, and nobody cared that I didn't earn a lot of money and I lived in a maid's room, and I thought that was great. And I still like that very much. Paris in particular, much more so than provincial France, but the French in general still respect smart, educated people.
Is there anything you don't like about Paris besides the electric scooters?
Oh boy, lots. The air pollution, and it's insidious, because when I first came here in the 1970s, the air was yellow and there was something honest about it. You could see it. It was really awful, but you saw it. Now you can't see the air pollution, but it's still here, and it's really very bad. The other thing is that Paris is in part denatured. It used to be a place, the whole center of Paris used to be full of working class people. The building where I live, we had a cardboard box factory in it. What the French call the mixité sociale was much better. It was much more real. We had little shops that have all disappeared of useful things. I still live in the Marais. I've been here for 33 years, and if there were 500 wonderful shops and hardware stores and things like that, and grocery stores, and we used to go and buy our cereal from a graniterie where all they sold was grains and cereals and stuff. All of that is gone, and the average age has come down to about 13, I think. Well, I'm being facetious as always, but still, it's very bobo,
right.
Bohemian bourgeois. It's just not the same city it was. Of course, San Francisco, I was born and grew up in San Francisco and Berkeley, and that's unrecognizable too.
Right.
So I guess all the desirable places have changed beyond recognition. I still think Paris as a big city is one of the really great cities in the world. There are others.
I want to ask you a practical question, David. You like to sort of sneak your way into courtyards. For someone who also likes doing that kind of thing, have you got any tips that you could give me?
Well, see, the thing is, when I started doing that, there were no codes on the doors, security codes, and now they're all locked. The only way to get in, and it's risky, is to wait for the mail carrier to arrive and then try to get in, but it's very difficult now. That's another thing that's irritating. I mean, 30 years ago or more, you could go anywhere and do anything, and no one ever challenged you, and no one minded. Now, because of, I guess, break-ins and also terrorism, obviously, it's just the city is not the open city that it was. So it's pretty tricky.
What about I looked down, I realized we're running out of time, so I actually might end it with a sort of question that I like to ask everybody. But first, before I get to that, you talked about walking from one end of the city to the other. That's also in Paris. You walked, I think, the north-south line, sort of I guess it's not the power axis, is it? But it's one of the axes of the city.
Yeah, the old pilgrimage route, the old ancient Roman road.
Right. Do you recommend doing that for a tourist?
Oh, no, because you really have to know what you're looking for. And, I mean, I would take people on that walk. The other thing is that it's pretty noisy and polluted. I think there are other nicer walks to do. But it is definitely interesting to walk all the way across the city. I would do it on the Seine. I have a whole chapter about doing that on the Seine. And when I did it, it was not nearly as nice as it is now. So things have improved in that way. You can go from Tolbiac, basically, in the 13th, the bridge up there, all the way across to Bir Hakeim in the, I guess it's the borders, crosses from the 15th to the 16th.
Sure.
So, and you can walk that entire way now without being molested by cars.
Right. Is there a preferable side to walk on if you're going that way? If you're going...
Well, you have to switch sides at a certain point, but I would start on the left bank and then switch to the right and then switch back to the left and then that's right.
Right,
because you run into problems on the right bank where the bateau mouche are and all of that.
Sure.
You don't want to be on that side.
Yeah.
But up at the top at Tolbiac on the eastern side, you don't want to be on the right hand side because the expressway is still used there.
Sure. I'll try and map that out. Yeah. But that's a good lead into my last question, which I tend to ask everybody, is for reasons unknown, you have to leave Paris. You get one last day here. Yeah. And also for reasons unknown, you're told that you have to spend your last day in one arrondissement, right?
Right.
Reasons unknown. Which do you choose, and how do you spend your last day?
Well, I choose the 4th in the Marais, and I spend it wandering around the way I always do. I just, I walk the streets. I read them like a map, and it's a historical map. So it's a palimpsest with many, many layers. And, sit in a cafe, look at the buildings, just enjoy the city. Courtyards, parks, sidewalk cafes, for sure.
Right, there you go. Can't go wrong in the Marais, really, can you?
Well, you can. You can eat really badly nowadays, but it is a wonderful part of town, for sure.
Well, I think our time's run out. I'd love to get you on the podcast again in the future and dig deeper into these kind of Philippe Auguste War kind of stories. I hope you'd be up for that one day.
Absolutely, yeah.
But for today, I think that's it. Thank you for joining me.
Well,
it's been real interesting.
Thank you for having me on.
Well, there you have it. That was David Downie. That was a really fun episode. I love doing the episodes where I'm out in the park or out at someone's office rather than sitting in the studio. You always feel like a little bit more of Paris is in there. I'm sure, well, I don't know, maybe you heard the flapping wings of the birds that were around us in the park. David and I went for a little walk afterwards and checked out some of the trees. One of the, what I thought was a pear tree over by the Philippe Auguste wall was actually a quince tree, he said. I didn't even know what a quince was, so there you go. But what I want to do, once again, check out his book, Paris, Journey into the City of Light. But what I want to do is I want to end this on a little bit of Gmail. That's where people have sent me, well, my last name's G, Oliver G. They've sent me mail, and I just wanted to read it out. There's 2 here that I got this week. One was from Peggy Bruns, and she's Peggy's been messaging me a little bit over the years. I think I've even read out 1 or 2 of her emails on this show before, but she says, today, signed up on Patreon as a member, and she said, Oliver, I've been listening to you for a couple of years, and I think you just keep getting better and better. I ran out of excuses, so I finally decided to become a Patreon supporter. Sorry it took so long. Well, Peggy, you don't need to be sorry. I'm glad to welcome you aboard, and thank you for your generosity, and thank you very much for listening for 2 years. That's crazy to me to even think that I've been doing it that long. So glad to have you on board. Hope you enjoy There's masses of bonus content, and I hope you enjoy reading that PDF that went with this very episode. The other email is from anyone who's watched my walk shows for members will recognize the name of Jim McPherson. He's a regular commenter, and he sends, he starts this email off with M.G, as in, that's how the French people say Monsieur. So, Monsieur G, the original of the Georges Seurat painting, A Sunday Afternoon on the island of La Grande Jatte, is here in Chicago at the Art Institute. Now, let me just rewind a little bit. The recent episode I did with John Baxter, I recorded the intro from this really interesting island off just north of Paris in the Seine that I'd never been to. Go back and listen to that one if you want to catch up on that story. And Jim says, "You are, of course, always welcome to visit our fair city. I'd love to go to Chicago." He adds, "You'll always have a place to stay and 2 earnest tour guides in Chicago." Well, that's very generous of you indeed. By the way, I think that both the podcast PDFs and the weekly newsletter are fantastic. Oh, that's something I never really talk about. If you're listening to this show and you don't know, I've been doing for about a month or so weekly newsletters every Friday with all sorts of stories. Like I told stories about, my lovely neighbor downstairs, or things that you can find, secrets in Paris, all that kind of stuff. And if you want to find out how to subscribe to that, you just scroll down on my website, halfway down the page, and there'll be a pop-up. And he goes, "Why not get in on the inbox list or whatever? Go and sign up and you'll get that stuff too." Jim continues, "It's quite helpful to have links and maps pointing us to your discoveries. We're amassing quite a dossier of things to do and places to go, and the more we know, the more we're eager to try. Thanks also for the latest impromptu from the Bois de Boulogne. That was a classic. I think a row down the Seine is next for you. Jim, you are crazy. There's absolutely no way I'm going to row down the Seine River, but I appreciate the kind words. What Jim is referring to is I jumped in a rowboat with 3 co-captains at the weekend and went for a sail right through the beautiful lake in the middle of the Bois de Boulogne. And I filmed about an hour of it just to see what we found. And I can recommend everybody do the same trip if you ever come to Paris. But that's it. That's it for this episode. Thank you for listening. Go and check out David Downie's book, Paris, Paris. It is really brilliant. Thank you to the sponsor of the show, people like Jim McPherson and Peggy Bruns, Patreon supporters, patreon.com/The Eiffel Tower. Go and get all the bonuses. But that's it from me. I'll see you on Monday. Hey, I'll give you a heads up now. The Monday episode I'll give you a teaser. It's all about shopping in Paris, how to do it, where to do it, and I've been very lucky indeed. I've been able to snag a shoe designer whose shoes are in the front window of the Printemps Gallery in central Paris, and she came into the studio to talk about shopping. Regular listeners probably know who I'm talking about. The rest of you will have to wait till Monday to find out, and I will talk to you then. Au revoir.
I don't really know where we are. I just want